Welcome. Welcome to another session. I'm going to be speaking about 4 relationship and life stages. Whether you're male or female, we all will experience sometimes we go through all of these stages. The first is unmarried. The first group. Second group, married. Third, divorced. And the fourth, widowed. A lot of times we hear people say and use and substitute the word unmarried for single. They say, when I'm single. We say single, married, divorced, widowed. The word single is the wrong representation. The word unmarried should be the right way we address things. And here is the key part. From about 18, when you're emancipated, when you are officially an adult, from a chronological perspective, you fall within the group that we call unmarried. There's nothing wrong with that group. As a matter of fact, you should begin as an unmarried person. We substitute it, like I said, with the word single. And we give a negative connotation to the word single. I do not agree with the connotation used in society these days. It's almost as though being single or unmarried indicates there's something fundamentally flawed with you. I do take issue with that position, but I can understand it. Because usually, if you think about the fact that life should be about relationships, and relationships are between people, and psychologists and psychiatrists, and sociologists, behavioral scientists have said that usually about 80% and more of our happiness and fulfillment in life will come from our relationships, our interactions with people. If that's the case, if you believe that to be the case, what it means is that the quality of your relationships are almost as important as any other major decisions you will choose. The house you would buy, the college you would go to, when you move out of mom's house, whether you move in with your boyfriend. The quality of your relationships are so important because they would make or break your happiness experience in life. Now, in talking about the 4 groups, let me address something first. Some time ago, I was speaking with a loved one and other friends. A lot of these discussions generally come from social interactions. And it was made known to myself that someone that I'm aware of and I know was in the process of going through a divorce. And let me set the scene. A married couple, been married for a number of years, and have kids, and going through a divorce. I won't go into the disclosure of who is filing and the reasons. Let's just simply say the divorce is going through. And I asked the question, I said, well, how long has this decision to go separate ways been on the table? And I was told about a year. Okay. And in the conversation, this particular conversation, I was then told, well, both parties have moved on. The woman has moved on, and she's seen someone and has a significant person in her life romantically, and the man has moved on as well. Now, there are a few kids involved. And so I asked the question, whether there had been any attempts to reconcile, to find a solution. And I was told, well, not really. And that struck me, which is partly why I wanted to speak about today's session. If you were to go back and look at the 4 groups that I shared, unmarried, married, divorced, and widowed, there's only one group, the last, where choice is removed from the individual's hands. In other words, when we love and we have loved ones, and this particular instance, a spouse, it's a tragedy when we lose a loved one. It's a painful experience. Hence why there's almost a blessing of protection for the widows and the orphans. The other three are usually based on our choices. So we get to choose. The fourth, we're dealt a hand. We just have to live with that hand we've been dealt. But the first three, we play a huge role. But the first stage, which is the unmarried stage, is where all of the seeds that will be germinating during that first period, in the second stage or the third stage. In other words, the decisions you make as a person, as an unmarried person, will determine the quality of your marriage. They'll also determine whether divorce is on the table or off the tables. Let me say that again so you can understand. The unmarried state is the most important state, primarily because it controls whether the second or the third take place. The fourth, we put that aside because we cannot control that. Therefore, the choices that we make as individuals, in other words, to make an omelette, you need eggs, you need good eggs. You cannot make a great omelette using one rotten egg and a few good eggs. So two people who come together and who want to be in a relationship, if one person is good and the other isn't, you're guaranteed, it's just a matter of time, that you will move very fast, especially if you have no voices of reason. You will move to the marriage stage, but very quickly you move into the divorce stage. But all of that could have been avoided if both parties understood the importance of their decisions and how the quality of their lives and their relationships are so important, and how they had to choose and select very carefully who they chose to be with for the rest of their lives. Now, I'm not suggesting that we don't make mistakes. We do. Where I have a problem and where I think work is needed is life is supposed to be about pouring into the next generation. Part of the reasons I do my teaching is because I have made so many mistakes over my many years. And it gives me joy knowing that I have shared and I continue to share some of my life experiences, my lived experiences, good, bad, or indifferent. And the purpose of that, you see, when we succeed, we celebrate, we party. When we fail, we introspect, we ponder, and we reflect. Pain plus progress can lead to success. In other words, if you introspect on some of your pain that has come as a result of things not working the way you hoped they would, and if you correctively make better decisions, over time, that is progress, that is growth, that could lead to fulfillment. So by taking one life and pouring your lived life in another life, and by saying, listen, you have two forms of the ledger. Examples, do this what I did and this will give you success. But here is a warning sign. Do not do what I have done in these areas so that you do not make the same mistakes. And what we should see is a trend. The trend should be a simple one. The sins of the fathers live unto the children, into the fourth and sometimes third and the fourth generation. But the blessings of the fathers also do the same. They move into the third and the fourth generation. So what we try to do is avoid making mistakes and pouring our life into the offsprings and the generations to come so that they make less mistakes. So that what you see is between grandfather and mother and granddaughter or grandson, there's almost an improvement where there's been life poured into life, poured into life. What we are seeing instead is the reverse. If you were to go back to the silent generation, firstly, the great generation, and you look at the lives of the great generation, if you adjust all things remaining equal, and you looked at the happiness and fulfillment they had, you would agree that those from the great generation, we envy them. We don't envy their sufferings, but we envy their integrity, how much they were complete. They understood who they were. They poured into the next generation, the silent generation. And like the great generation, they were very successful. But since the baby boom generation, if you were to look at the baby boom generation, Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, and you just look at the trend, we are richer than we've ever been. We have more money than we've ever had. We have more data and information than we've ever had. We're making more money than we've ever done. But when it comes to relationships, we just do not know how to make it work. We're worse. Go back to the 1940s. Now, I understand the whole concept, and believe me, Maslow's hierarchy of need plays a role. I understand that when it comes to survival, our motivations are different. And right now, we've gone past our physiological needs, and we've moved beyond our emotional needs. We're now in the point of self-actualization, so much so that we can argue about certain things that are just, I guess those who are in the poor countries look over to the West and simply say, is this actually happening in the West? Those in the poorer countries are looking at the so-called intelligent developed nations and thinking, well, they've actually lost it. And part of the reason for this is, go back to the 4 stages. We have failed to pour into our generations to follow us, or leave a pathway for making the right decisions. Unmarried, married, divorced, and widowed. I'll go back to the example I started with. The question I asked was whether the 2 couples had actually been to therapy. And I was told, no. Okay, and they've been separated for a year plus. Yes. They have kids involved. Yes. And they're proceeding with the divorce. Yes. Is it irreconcilable differences? Who knows? And as I sat there, I realized how selfish we have become. Our generation, my generation, have become. You see, when you have children, it no longer becomes about your happiness. It becomes what's in the best interest for the kids. Now, I understand if it's a very, very fractured relationship, then it's best not to have that violence and have all that tension, emotional, physical violence in full display. But the couple I'm referring to here have none of those. I think if I were to decide, knowing both parties, I would say it's a failure in being heard, failure of communication. One or both sides do not feel heard in the relationship. The inability to communicate. And what we see here is a thriving, successful marriage being thrown down the drain because one or both parties cannot, both or one does not have the fortitude to say, listen, why don't we get professional help? This is where I get really, really frustrated. Why don't we sit down with a therapist, a counselor, a professional? If you choose none of those for some particular reason, you go before the elders. If you don't want to go before the elders, you call together the entire family and friends and say, listen, we are having problems. Both of us are having problems and our children will suffer as a result. We need help. We are so quick, and this is perhaps the myth of happiness. We are so quick to toss away relationships that have been created, that was built on a foundation of love, at the moment that we see a hurdle. And the lack of wisdom in recognizing that the grass is not greener on the other side, it's just green. As a matter of fact, you go from a 50% chance of divorce in your first marriage to a 67 probability of divorce in your second marriage, to a 78 probability of divorce in your third marriage. In other words, if you're having a second marriage, which if it's what you want, the odds of actually having a successful second marriage is much lower than the odds of having a successful first marriage. So the first instinct should always be, can we make this work? Now, you've heard me say this many times. Should you find yourself on a chronically leaking boat, energy devoted to changing vessels will be more productive than energy devoted to patching up the leaks. I get that. But a marriage, a union, is not a leaking boat. Not always. The only time it becomes a leaking boat is when you've gone through long periods of counseling, therapy, support, so that both parties have the ability to communicate and share how they feel and feel heard until you've actually exhausted all options. The idea of terminating a relationship or marriage when you have kids, for me, is beyond believable. And this goes in many ways to this modern Western philosophy that is all about happiness, that has encouraged men not to be responsible, not to know that a husband, the name comes from someone who bounds the house together. And we've trained women to think, well, men are replaceable, and not to value what men want, so much so that it's hard for women, modern women particularly, to recognize that a man has feelings and he has needs. And expressing how he feels and his needs should not mean you undermine his authority and his position in the relationship. The same way he celebrates you and listens to your needs is the same way you should celebrate him and listen to his need. Now, in any case, here is where I bring today's session to a meaningful close. We get to choose in the first stage. The decisions we make and the choices we make will come with costs, constraints, consequences, and trade-offs. No solutions. You either move from unmarried to married, and you stay married. Ideally, this is the perfect for some people. They stay married until the end, and they move into the stage of being widowed. Hopefully they don't stay there too long before their time is over. But what we are finding is, for some reason in the West, the average length of marriage in the UK is about 7 years. The younger you are, the higher the likelihood that that number will be lower. The more intelligent you are and educated you are, rather not intelligent, educated you are, the higher the probability that that will come even sooner. The less trained you are about and prepared you are for marriage, the higher the likelihood that that will come sooner. In any case, 7 years or below. And what we are finding is that we're not doing it as well. You can see someone who has been married, got divorced before 7th year. You ask them, are your parents married? And they say, yes, my parents are still married. They've been married for 50 years. And you ask them, what about your parents' parents? Well, my grandparents are still married, but they were married for 60 years before my granddad or my grandmom passed away. What you find is that we're doing things very poorly. Why? Because we do not know how to make the right choices and decisions. Secondly, we have actually got to a point where we've seen and we've accepted society-wise that staying in the unmarried, the first stage, is a badge of honor. As a matter of fact, those who even risk moving to the married group, second stage, are seen as nuts and crazy. Young women are told, wait until your 30s. Then they get to their 30s and they realize, well, we waited too late. They choose because the clock is ticking and they choose the wrong person. And then quickly they move from the married state to the third group, which is the divorced. Now, for some strange reason, a year ago, the UK passed its no-fault divorce. And so today, just like filling an application form, you don't have to go through the process. Fill the form. You don't have to have anybody as an intercessor. You don't have to have a mediator. It can be fast-tracked and you have your freedom. People are celebrating divorces like we celebrated when you graduated from university. There's a group that actually celebrates divorce as freedom. Well, I find that strange. I find that really strange. And for some reason, we're making a mistake of not knowing how to sit down. And let me share something perhaps that I think could help. If you find yourself in a position where you're struggling in a relationship, I know that it's a multivariate process, but if you have been married and you have children, that's the only group I'm concerned about. Like if you're single and you're just dating, therefore both of you are unmarried, do whatever you want. If you're unmarried but adults, do whatever you want. If you're married but both of you are adults, have no kids, do whatever you want. Your choice, your life. But if you have kids, for the love of Christ, could you put the kids first before both of your needs? Could you recognize that at the moment you chose to bring those kids into this world, it no longer became about you? That you should exhaust all options, you should do whatever it takes, you should see the best professionals, you should introduce time into that decision-making process. My process and my recommendation is, don't be in a hurry to move on. Sometimes it's a third voice that causes the separation of people who should be bonded together and who had a thriving relationship. See someone, go through the process of allowing each other to be heard, learn how to communicate again, and perhaps this is an important recommendation. Learn how to date each other again. You may have been together for 8 years and 10 years and 12 years and 15 years, and you've known each other since high school, and you've seen him grow and he's seen you grow, and you've lost a sense of the value of both of yourselves. Remember what I said in the session I did last week, whatever defines you limits you, and that relationships are no way you should find yourself. There can be places where you lose yourself. There should be places where you express yourself. But if you may have started early and young, you have something of a great foundation. Don't throw that away. Don't throw the baby away with the bath water. You can throw the bad water away, but keep the baby. Separate for 2 months if you need to. In that period, facilitate a conversation, a communication approach through a professional. Both of you, single counseling, single individual therapy, and then group joint therapy. In addition to that, there should be a separate therapy going for the kids to make sure that the needs of the kids are also being met. And then in that process, extend time. Don't be quick to sign those papers. Introduce time into the process. And even if you feel that you're frustrated and you've had it, I don't like the word miracles. There's a saying that we are responsible for our health. The universe is responsible for its miracles, and God is responsible for its miracles. But I have seen relationships that have gone beyond points of no return, resuscitated, and thrive. But for that to take place, both parties have to have the willing spirit. You can go from being unmarried to being married, rather than jump straight to being divorced. Introduce time into that process to see whether there's a possibility that you can work through the issues that both of you had. After all, there was a time when you loved him or you loved her, and whilst the love may have disappeared, relationships are not about love. That's a cherry on the cake. And this is the key thing. We've made happiness and feelings a God. So people will say, well, I don't feel happy. I'm not happy in the relationship. And what they are referring to is the excitement that comes at the early stage of a relationship, but void of responsibility. Relationships and marriage are about duty, honor, responsibility. When kids come into the picture, it becomes more about sacrifice, your lineage, and making sure that those kids have the right foundation. That does not mean that you sacrifice your entire self, no. And this is where a professional comes into the picture. Someone can help you learn how to communicate your needs better. Someone can teach your other half how to listen and empathize better. Someone can teach both of you how to do that dance, how to rekindle your love, how to rekindle your experience. The streets are cold. They're not what they used to be. And if we were playing a numbers game, and I came up to you and I said, you can stay and try to make your first relationship work. You already have 5 years, so there's something to work with, and there's a 50% chance that it will fail. But you can leave and go out to the marketplace and, I guess in this new wave of dating, get involved in this madness for 1 year, 2 years, burn time, waste money, and the probability of success is 50% also to someone who you do not know, who you're banking on emotions and feelings. And let me say something that's important. If you are a woman, of course, when you go out, back out there and you start dating, you feel as though you're being courted and it's romantic and you're excited. If you are a man, you feel motivated and enthused, and you feel as though you're chasing, and your adrenaline and your testosterone and all the chemicals are flowing, your dopamine. You feel as though you've found someone to validate you. But remember, keep this in mind: you're taking the same person and the same head with you to the next relationship. And most of the time, if you haven't done the work on the person, remember, you are the omelette. If you are, for some reason, let's just assume you're not, but if you are the bad omelette, it doesn't matter who you yoke with, the product would always be bad. The early stages of a relationship can be, we can present our best self. You might be a bad egg, and for the first 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months of dating someone new, we can, especially if you're dating and seeing them every week, once a week or twice a week, it's possible to present your best self. This is partly why I do not like long distance relationships at all. Because people see in your best self, they see you when they want to see you, usually at weekends, holidays, you're excited, you've been looking forward to them, but they do not deal with the real issue about life, which is that tension that we often have, and how we relate to each other in our moments of vulnerability, weakness, during our trials and tribulations, how we communicate it, and how we allow other people to be heard, and how we facilitate the experience of being heard and hearing other people. You can have all of that in the romance phase, but remember, if you are the omelette, you can only make eggs as good as you are. So, if you've decided, and let's just assume you've tried everything you can, and you're moving to that third group, which is divorced, there are some recommendations, especially if you have children. Do the work. Individual therapy is important. Take the number of years you've been married or been together with that person and multiply by 0.25. That's the number of time duration you need to be in therapy. Sometimes you have it done earlier, and that's fine, but that should be a goal. So if you've been married for 5 years, a quarter of that will be a year, and who knows, maybe 3 months. Therapy. Why? Because if you've loved and loved strongly and loved so much that you decided to give a man the highest honor that a woman can give a man, which is to risk her life at childbirth to bring his seed to the next life, your pair bonding with a man is at the highest level. Physically you can separate it, spiritually you can separate it, emotionally you can separate, but you're still intertwined from a pair bonding perspective. It takes a while to recover from the process, to heal, to forgive, to let go, to understand what it was about yourself, and know how not to bring the same person to the next relationship. It takes time. Is it possible you can do it in 6 months? Yes. But you have to learn how to heal yourself. Now, I'm not saying you don't date, but I'm saying you date with intention. You make it clear to the person you are going through therapy, and then you allow them the opportunity to let you breathe rather than overwhelm you with the high of love and excitement, that it derails you from your growth and personal development journey, and you carry the same head into the same next relationship and make the same mistakes. We should not be making mistakes that are so obvious. Our grandparents didn't make this much mistakes, and they didn't gift us this brokenness. We are gifting our children and our children's children a level of brokenness that is just unfair. We have to learn how to make choices better. Now, I hope that's been useful.